I was labeled the ugly high school grad and discarded like trash by my family of elite Chicago surgeons. A decade later, I walked into my sister's lavish wedding. My mother pointed her crystal glass at me, demanding to know why a defect was ruining their perfect day. My sister screamed that I was an uninvited failure who did not belong among high society. But then her groom turned around, his face draining of all color. He stepped between us and yelled, "How dare you speak to her like that? Do you have any idea who this woman is?" I simply smiled and took a sip of my champagne. They really had no idea. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I am Gemma, 33 years old, and for the last 10 years, I was the ghost of the Kensington family. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Chicago, my parents, Barbara and Gregory, demanded absolute perfection. In their eyes, perfection meant only one thing: becoming a doctor. My father was the chief of surgery at Chicago General Hospital. My mother was a renowned pediatric surgeon. My younger sister Brittany was their golden child, a brilliant medical resident who never stepped out of line. I was the scapegoat, the creative one who preferred coding and technology over biology and anatomy. When I refused to continue my pre-med track and dropped out to pursue health tech software, they literally threw my suitcases onto the driveway. Tonight was the first time I had seen them since that day. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Plaza Hotel was dripping in wealth. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceiling, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. The room was packed with the city's medical elite hospital board members, renowned specialists, and wealthy benefactors. It was the perfect stage for the Kensington family to show off their flawless legacy. I walked through the double mahogany doors during the formal pre-ceremony reception, just as the best man finished his welcome toast. I wore a sleek, emerald green designer gown that cost more than my parents' first car, but to them, I suppose, I still looked like the worthless 23-year-old they had kicked out into the cold. My mother Barbara was standing at the head table, tapping a silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute to command the room's attention for her own toast. She raised her glass, her perfectly tailored smile radiating across the crowd. Then her eyes locked onto me, standing near the back of the room. Her smile vanished instantly. The warmth in her face morphed into a mask of pure disgust. She lowered her glass, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the delicate crystal stem. "Who let this defect into the room?" Barbara's voice cut through the elegant silence of the ballroom like a rusted blade. The string quartet faltered and stopped playing. Hundreds of heads turned in my direction. "Security!" my mother barked into the microphone, her voice echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings. "Remove this woman immediately!" A high school grad who dropped out of pre-med thinks she can come beg for scraps from esteemed doctors? How dare you show your face here? The whispers began immediately. Elite doctors and their spouses judged me with side glances, murmuring about the family embarrassment they had heard rumors about for years. I did not shrink away. I did not cry. I simply walked over to a passing waiter, took a fresh glass of champagne from his silver tray, and took a slow, deliberate sip. Brittany, resplendent in a custom lace bridal gown that flared out around her like a white cloud, shoved her chair back so violently it tipped over. She stomped down the steps of the main stage, her face flushed with fury. "Get out!" Brittany screamed, pointing a manicured finger right at my chest. "You are not invited. You have no right to stand among the elite. We are a family of doctors, of lifesavers, of brilliant minds. You are nothing but a dropout who embarrassed our legacy. Did you come here to ask for money? Did your little computer hobby fail?" I looked at my younger sister, taking in her furious, entitled expression. She had always thrived on putting me down to elevate herself. "I do not need your money, Brittany," I said calmly, my voice steady and completely devoid of the intimidation they expected. I am just here to congratulate the groom. My father, Gregory, stood up from his seat at the head table. He adjusted his expensive tuxedo jacket and glared at me with the same cold disappointment that had defined my entire childhood. "You have some nerve, Gemma," my father said, projecting his voice so his colleagues could hear. "We gave you every opportunity to be someone of value. We offered to pay for medical school. We offered you a respectable path. You chose to be a rebellious failure. Do not think you can ruin your sister's perfect day with your pathetic jealousy. Leave now, before I have you arrested for trespassing." I smiled, swirling the champagne in my glass. "I am not trespassing, Gad. The groom personally sent an invitation to my office." "Liar," Brittany shrieked. "My fiancé would never invite a piece of trash like you to our wedding." Up on the stage, the groom had been facing away from the commotion, speaking with one of the catering managers about a delay in the kitchen. At the sound of his bride screaming, he finally turned around. Liam was the newly appointed chief financial officer of Chicago General Hospital. My family thought he was the ultimate catch, a brilliant financial mind who would secure their power within the hospital hierarchy for decades to come. Liam looked past the furious faces of his bride-to-be and her parents. His eyes landed on me. The color drained from Liam's face so fast he looked like he might pass out. His jaw dropped. The champagne flute he had been holding slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sharp crash making several guests jump. He practically shoved the best man out of the way as he scrambled down the stairs of the stage. He did not go to comfort his screaming bride. He did not go to stand with his powerful new father-in-law. Liam sprinted directly toward me, nearly tripping over his own expensive leather shoes. When he reached me, he stopped abruptly, standing at rigid attention. He bowed his head, his hands shaking visibly at his sides. Boss Liam stammered, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Chairman, Gemma, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Switzerland, signing the international acquisition contracts." The entire ballroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Brittany stared at her future husband as if he had suddenly sprouted a second head. My mother's mouth opened and closed silently. My father furrowed his brow, stepping forward with a nervous, condescending chuckle. "Liam Sohn," my father said, waving a hand dismissively. "You must be confused. Or maybe you have had too much to drink. This is our disowned eldest daughter, Gemma, the one we told you about. She is not a chairman of anything. She is just a complete failure who dropped out of school." Liam whipped his head around to look at my father, his eyes wide with absolute horror. "Shut up, Gregory," Liam hissed, completely dropping the respectful tone he usually reserved for the chief of surgery. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" I took another slow sip of my champagne, savoring the taste and the look of absolute bewilderment on my family's faces. "Dad is right," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. "I am a failure. I am the failure whose company just acquired Chicago General Hospital's $40 million distress debt and signed a court-approved restructuring agreement granting HealthSync controlling governance rights over the hospital's management company." The guests erupted into shocked gasps. Board members of the hospital who were seated at the VIP tables suddenly sat up straight, their eyes darting between me and Liam for confirmation. "That is impossible!" Barbara yelled, her voice losing its polished society edge and becoming shrill. "You are lying. You are a delusional broke dropout. You do not have $40, let alone $40 million. Brittany grabbed Liam's arm, shaking it frantically. "Tell her to stop lying, Liam. Throw her out. She is just trying to ruin my wedding because she is jealous of my medical degree." Liam violently yanked his arm from Brittany's grasp, looking at her with disbelief and panic. "She is not lying, Brittany," he shouted. Gemma founded HealthSync Solutions. Her corporation acquired the hospital's senior debt and majority governance rights last Thursday. My office reports to the transition board she chairs. She does not magically own every brick, but she controls the restructuring that determines whether this hospital survives. My father stumbled backward, bumping into a table. The crystal glasses rattled. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps trying to reconcile the powerful, impeccably dressed woman standing before him with the terrified, 23-year-old girl he had thrown out onto the street. HealthSync Solutions, my father whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. You cannot be the CEO of HealthSync. They are a global conglomerate. You are just a coder. I handed my empty champagne glass to Liam, who took it with trembling hands like an obedient servant. I was just a coder, Dad, I replied smoothly. But it turns out that building revolutionary healthcare management software is much more lucrative than begging for your approval. You see, while you were busy bragging about Brittany's residency, I was busy building the infrastructure that manages every patient record, billing cycle, and surgical schedule in your hospital. My mother shook her head frantically, stepping forward with a wild look in her eyes. No, this is a trick. You hired actors. You manipulated Liam. You are a fraud. The denial was so thick, so desperate it was almost pathetic. They had built their entire identity on being superior to me. The idea that I had not only survived without them, but had conquered their entire industry was breaking their minds. You think I am a fraud, Mom? I asked, reaching into my designer clutch. Let me show you exactly how real this is. Are you completely sure you want to do this right now? Liam whispered, sweating profusely. The hospital board is all sitting right there. I looked at Liam, then at my mother's furious, defiant face. I have waited 10 years for this exact moment. I am just getting started. Tell me, what do you think they will say when I show them the truth? Barbara did not wait for my answer. Her face twisted into an ugly, unrecognizable sneer as she lunged forward. With a violent swing of her arm, she slapped a full glass of red wine off the nearest cocktail table. The crystal shattered against the pristine marble floor, sending a spray of dark red liquid splashing across the hem of my emerald gown. You think I do not know exactly who you are? Barbara shrieked. Her voice tore through the silent ballroom, completely devoid of the refined, upper-class persona she had spent decades cultivating. You are the same pathetic, worthless disappointment I threw out of my house 10 years ago. I tossed your cheap suitcase onto the concrete myself. I told you that if you abandoned your medical degree for some low-class, blue-collar computer nonsense, you would be dead to this family. The guests gasped. Several elite surgeons and wealthy hospital benefactors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between my mother's furious face and my perfectly calm demeanor. My father, Gregory, immediately stepped up to support his wife. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the authoritative aura of a chief of surgery. Please, everyone, forgive this intrusion, he announced to the room, waving his hand at me like I was a stray animal. My eldest daughter has always been deeply unstable, a psychiatric tragedy. We tried to get her help, but she chose a life of delinquency. She is clearly having a manic episode. Brittany, emboldened by our parents, marched right up to my face. Her bridal veil dragged through the spilled wine on the floor, but she did not even notice. You heard them, Gemma. You are a delusional psycho. Did you really think you could waltz into my wedding and claim you bought a hospital? You do not even have a college degree. Barbara pointed a shaking manicured finger at my face. Where would a college dropout get $40 million? We all know how girls like you get money. She turned to the audience, addressing the hospital board members directly. Do not listen to a single word she says. She probably slept with some geriatric billionaire and convinced him to let her play pretend CEO. She is nothing but a cheap gold digger trying to ruin her sister's special day out of pure, bitter jealousy. Exactly, Brittany chimed in, crossing her arms over her lace gown. You probably rented that dress, Gemma. You are disgusting. Coming to my wedding to flaunt money you earned on your back just because you were too stupid to pass organic chemistry? Liam, the groom-to-be, looked like he was about to suffer a massive heart attack. He grabbed his fiancée by the shoulders and tried to pull her back. Brittany, shut your mouth. You have no idea what you are doing. Dr. Kensington, please. I am begging you, stop talking. You are going to ruin us all. But my family was completely blinded by their own arrogance. They shoved Liam aside. To them, I was forever the scapegoat, the punching bag they used to make themselves feel superior. The idea that their high society medical dynasty was now at the mercy of the daughter they had discarded was a reality their narcissistic brains simply could not process. So they defaulted to their favorite weapon, public humiliation. The murmurs in the ballroom escalated into a low, buzzing roar. The chief of cardiology, a man I recognized from my childhood, shook his head in disgust. The spouses of the hospital board members covered their mouths, whispering eagerly to one another. The flashing lights of smartphone cameras began to illuminate the dimly lit room. The esteemed doctors of Chicago General were pulling out their phones, recording the Kensington family's spectacular meltdown, as if it were a reality television show. I looked down at the dark red wine staining the bottom of my expensive dress. 10 years ago, an outburst like this from my mother would have reduced me to a sobbing, hyperventilating mess. I would have begged for her forgiveness. I would have internalized every toxic, sexist word she hurled at me. I would have believed that I truly was a worthless defect. But standing there now, backed by a decade of grueling late nights, relentless coding, and ruthless business acquisitions, I felt absolutely nothing but cold, calculated amusement. They wanted to play a public game of reputation destruction. They had no idea they were bringing a knife to a nuclear fight. I slowly wiped a stray drop of wine from my wrist. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream back. I simply looked past my screaming mother and focused on the massive LED screen positioned behind the main stage. It was currently displaying a slideshow of Brittany and Liam's expensive engagement photos. Because my corporation frequently hosted our annual tech galas at this exact hotel, I knew the audiovisual system here possessed an open wireless casting feature for VIP corporate clients. You want to talk about how I get my money, Mom? I asked, my voice chillingly calm. You want to call me a fraud in front of your entire hospital board? I unlocked my phone and opened the secure presentation portal my company used whenever it held events at this hotel. HealthSync's event agreement gave our authorized executives temporary casting credentials, and the hotel's audiovisual manager had activated my account after Liam added me to the guest list. I tapped the approved screen-sharing icon. Behind the stage, the 50-foot LED display flickered. The engagement slideshow vanished, and a redacted closing certificate appeared, stripped of confidential pricing schedules and personal identifiers. The header read, Chicago General Hospital Restructuring and Senior Debt Acquisition. It was the public-facing document the hospital board had approved for announcement once the transaction closed. The collective gasp from the wedding guests was deafening. I swiped my finger across my phone screen, zooming in on the header of the document. The words were displayed in massive, bold font. Confidential Asset Purchase Agreement, Chicago General Hospital Debt Portfolio Acquisition. I turned to look at my mother, whose mouth was hanging open in a silent scream. Take a good look at the screen, Mom, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the dead silent room. Everyone, please look closely at the signature line on page 47. I swiped again. The screen shifted, magnifying a signature that filled the entire display. Above the neat cursive letters read the title, Gemma Kensington, sole founder and chief executive officer, HealthSync Solutions. Beside the signature was the official notary stamp and the corporate seal verifying the transaction of $40 million. The hospital board members seated at the front VIP tables practically leaped out of their chairs. An older man with silver hair, the chairman of the hospital board, pulled out his reading glasses and stared at the massive screen in absolute shock. "It is entirely true," the chairman stammered loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "The buyout went through last Thursday. The acquiring corporation insisted on remaining anonymous until the transition period was finalized." We had no idea the CEO of HealthSync was Dr. Kensington's daughter. I stepped closer to the stage, making sure every single person in the room could hear me perfectly. "There is no sugar daddy, Mom," I said, looking directly into her panicked eyes. "There is no geriatric billionaire funding my lifestyle. There is only the ugly college dropout you kicked to the curb. I built HealthSync Solutions from scratch in a cramped, freezing studio apartment while you were busy bragging about Brittany's medical school acceptance." I turned away from my family and faced the crowd of elite surgeons, hospital administrators, and wealthy benefactors. "For the past 6 years, every single time you logged into your hospital database to update a patient chart, you were using my software. Every time you submitted a billing code, booked an operating room, or ordered a life-saving prescription, that data was processed securely through my company's encrypted servers. I digitized your entire medical network. And when your hospital administration recklessly overspent and racked up $40 million in private equity debt, it was my company that bailed you out. I am not just an uninvited guest at this wedding. I am the primary creditor of the hospital that employs every single doctor in this room." My sister Brittany looked like she had been struck by lightning. The expensive bridal bouquet slipped from her hands, landing with a soft thud in the puddle of spilled wine on the marble floor. Her eyes darted wildly between the colossal numbers displayed on the LED screen and her fiancé, Liam. "Liam, is this true?" Brittany demanded, her voice trembling with absolute panic. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me she hacked the screen." Liam refused to look at her. He kept his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "It is true," he whispered. "I report to the HealthSync-led transition board. Her company owns the senior debt, controls the restructuring covenants, and can recommend removal of executives who obstruct the turnaround." The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted drastically. The mocking whispers and judgmental stares from the elite guests completely vanished. They were replaced by fearful silence and awestruck stares. The power dynamic had completely inverted in the span of 2 minutes. The Kensington family, who had paraded around Chicago as untouchable medical royalty, were now exposed as completely dependent on the daughter they had violently discarded. I expected my parents to feel shame. I expected apologies, or tears, or perhaps even a silent, humiliated retreat out the back doors. But I had underestimated the sheer, bottomless depth of their narcissism. I watched a terrifying transformation wash over my mother's face. The embarrassment and fury melted away in an instant, replaced by a sickeningly bright, artificial smile. She quickly smoothed down her designer dress and stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with unchecked greed. "Gregory," Barbara gasped, grabbing my father's arm and shaking it with manufactured excitement. "Do you see this? Do you see what our girl has done?" My father caught on immediately. The cold, dismissive glare he had given me just moments ago was replaced by a beaming expression of paternal pride. He walked toward me with his arms wide open, laughing loudly as if we were sharing a wonderful inside joke. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father announced, addressing the ballroom with his booming, authoritative voice. "What a magnificent surprise! Please let us give a resounding round of applause for my brilliant eldest daughter." No one clapped. The guests simply stared, completely bewildered by the sudden psychotic change in his demeanor. My father dropped his arms but kept his terrifyingly enthusiastic smile plastered on his face. "You see, everyone, this is the Kensington legacy at work. 10 years ago, my wife and I saw that Gemma had unparalleled potential in the technology sector. We knew that a traditional medical path would only hold her back. But she was stubborn. She lacked the drive to strike out on her own. So as parents, we had to make the most agonizing decision of our lives. Barbara rushed to his side, placing a hand over her heart and forcing a tear to well up in her eye. "We had to use tough love," she cried out, her voice dripping with theatrical emotion. "It broke our hearts to push her out of the nest. When I threw her suitcase on the driveway, I cried myself to sleep for weeks. But we knew that if we gave her a safety net, she would never reach her true potential. We sacrificed our relationship with our beloved daughter so she could become the billionaire CEO she was destined to be." I stared at them, genuinely repulsed. They were trying to take credit for the decade of starvation, exhaustion, and trauma they had inflicted on me. They were spinning their horrific abuse into a narrative of visionary parenting. My father took another step toward me, reaching out to clasp my shoulder. I stepped back, avoiding his touch, but he simply smiled wider. "We are so incredibly proud of you, Gemma," my father declared, ensuring the hospital board members were listening. "And now that you have achieved this monumental success, it is time for you to come home. Running a global conglomerate and managing $40 million in hospital debt is far too much pressure for a young woman to handle alone. But do not worry, sweetheart. As your family, your mother and I will be stepping in to help you manage HealthSync Solutions. The Kensington family will consolidate our medical expertise with your technological assets. We will run this empire together." Brittany suddenly snapped out of her shock. The sheer magnitude of the wealth displayed on the screen had completely erased her bridal fury. She practically ran over to me, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. "Gemma! Oh my God," Brittany gasped, grabbing my hands before I could pull away. "You are a billionaire. We are billionaires. You completely fooled us. I cannot believe you bought my hospital. This means I can get the chief resident position immediately. You have to put me on your board of directors. We have so much to celebrate." I yanked my hands out of Brittany's grasp with such violent force that she stumbled backward, her diamond bracelets clattering loudly in the silent room. I wiped my palms against the smooth silk of my emerald gown, maintaining eye contact with her as if I were brushing off toxic residue. I echoed, letting a sharp, humorless laugh slice through the heavy air of the ballroom. "There is no we, Brittany. There is no our, and there is absolutely no universe in which I would ever grant a board seat to a mediocre medical resident who still needs her daddy to threaten attending physicians just to pass her clinical evaluations." Brittany's greedy smile shattered instantly. Her face flushed a mottled, ugly shade of crimson. My mother, refusing to abandon her desperate performance, lunged forward. She threw her arms wide open, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face as she played directly to the audience of elite surgeons watching us. My baby girl Barbara wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured agony. "Mommy missed you so much. Come here and let us put this silly grudge behind us." As she closed in for the embrace, I took a single, deliberate step to the left. Barbara, clutching nothing but empty air, stumbled awkwardly in her 6-inch designer heels. Her arms flailed and she nearly pitched face first into the puddle of shattered crystal and spilled red wine. My father had to lunge forward to catch her by the waist, his face burning with absolute humiliation as several hospital board members visibly recoiled from the pathetic display. "Save the theatrical performance for your country club friends, Barbara," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the room. "It will not work on me. And it certainly will not work on the people in this room once they realize exactly what kind of people have been running their hospital." My father straightened up, his chest heaving as the facade of the proud visionary parent finally cracked. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "How dare you humiliate your mother like this? We are your family. We raised you. The strict boundaries we set were designed to protect you from your own impulsive stupidity. You owe your entire resilient mindset to us. If we had not pushed you out, you would have nothing. You owe us your gratitude, and you owe us respect. I stepped closer to him, closing the distance until I was looking directly into the eyes of the man who had made my childhood a living nightmare. You did not push me out to teach me resilience, Dad, I said, keeping my tone deadly calm while his face turned purple with rage. You threw me out because you intercepted my mail and discovered I was applying for a small business loan instead of registering for the medical college admission test prep courses you demanded. You did not just kick me out of the house. You froze my checking account. You called my prospective landlord and threatened to sue him with your army of hospital lawyers if he dared to rent a studio apartment to me. You systematically tried to destroy every single avenue of survival I had. The whispers in the ballroom flared up again. The chief of surgery was being exposed not just as a bad father, but as a vindictive, controlling monster. I did not stop. I wanted every single person in his professional circle to know the truth. You wanted me to fail, I continued, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. You wanted me to starve. You wanted me to come crawling back on my hands and knees begging for your forgiveness, just so you could parade me around as a cautionary tale. While I was rationing packets of instant noodles and sleeping on the floor of a 24-hour public library just to use their free internet to write my software code, you were taking European river cruises. You were buying Brittany a brand new Mercedes just for passing basic anatomy. Do not stand there and pretend your abuse was an act of parental love. You are a tyrant who could not stand losing control of his favorite punching bag. My mother, clinging to my father's arm, tried to salvage their dying reputation. Gemma, sweetheart, she cried out, trying to project her voice to the VIP tables. You are misremembering things due to the stress of your work. The human brain distorts trauma. We were always your biggest supporters. We funded your entire life. We paid your expensive college tuition right up until the day you left. That was the exact opening I had been waiting for. The hypocrisy had reached its absolute peak, and it was time to detonate the next bomb. You paid my tuition, I asked, tilting my head with a slow, predatory smile. That is a fascinating claim to make in a room full of people who manage hospital finances. I lifted my phone, tapping the screen to reconnect to the massive LED display behind the stage. The hospital debt acquisition document vanished, replaced immediately by a split screen of high-resolution banking statements and internal university financial records. Because according to my records, I announced, gesturing to the glowing 50-foot screen, you stopped paying my tuition the very second I switched my major. But you did not just stop paying. You demanded the university refund the remaining $40,000 semester balance. And you did not put that money back into a college fund, did you? I looked at my sister, whose eyes were darting frantically across the bank statements displayed on the screen. The greed that had illuminated her face just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a rabid, cornered fury as she realized she was not getting a single dime of my empire. She realized I was not a cash cow. I was the executioner. Let us talk about where that tuition money actually went, I said softly, my eyes locking onto Brittany. Because the truth about the Kensington family finances is going to make this wedding the most memorable event in Chicago medical history. Brittany could not take it anymore. The prospect of having her financial secrets exposed in front of the entire Chicago medical elite was terrifying. But what truly broke her was the loss of the spotlight. This was supposed to be the day she cemented her status as the crown jewel of the Kensington dynasty. She was the beautiful bride, the brilliant resident, the flawless daughter, marrying the hospital's financial prodigy. Instead, her wedding had been entirely hijacked by the sister she had spent a decade mocking. The realization that she was no longer the most important person in the room snapped whatever fragile restraint she had left. Brittany let out a visceral, piercing shriek that forced several guests in the front row to cover their ears. She raised her arms and hurled her custom cascade bridal bouquet directly at my head. I simply tilted my shoulder, letting the heavy arrangement of white orchids and roses sail past me. It crashed into a crystal centerpiece behind me, sending shattered glass and flower petals raining down onto the dance floor.
You are a thief!
Brittany screamed at the top of her lungs, hiking up the heavy layers of her designer lace gown and stomping heavily toward the stage. She did not look like a blushing bride anymore. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her carefully pinned updo was unraveling strands of blonde hair, whipping around her face as she snatched a microphone off its stand.
Everything you have is mine!
She bellowed into the microphone, the audio feedback whining painfully through the ballroom speakers.
You stole my future to build your little computer company. You took my tuition money. Do not sit there and pretend you are some self-made genius. You used the Kensington wealth to fund your startup, and now you owe me. You owe me everything.
The sheer delusion of her outburst left the room entirely paralyzed. She was openly rewriting reality, attempting to claim that the $40,000 refund our parents had clawed back from my university was somehow stolen by me. "You have to give me half of the company," Brittany demanded, her voice cracking with frantic desperation. She pointed her microphone at me like it was a weapon. "I am the doctor in this family. I am the one who actually understands medicine. You are just a glorified IT worker. I am the one who deserves to represent the medical world. You need to transfer 50% of your shares to my name right now. It is only fair. Consider it my wedding gift, since you ruined my reception." I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the depths of her entitlement. She was standing in front of the hospital's board of directors, throwing a temper tantrum like a spoiled toddler demanding half of a multi-billion-dollar global corporation just because we shared the same last name. "Brittany, honey, lower your voice," my mother hissed, rushing forward to grab her arm. Barbara was not upset by Brittany's demands. She was just terrified of how unhinged her golden child looked in front of their wealthy peers. "We will handle the equity transfer with the lawyers tomorrow. Just smile and let the photographers take a picture of you two together. We need to control the narrative." But Brittany violently shoved our mother away.
Get your hands off me, Mom. I am not waiting until tomorrow. She is standing right here, flaunting my money. She owes me. If I am going to be the chief resident, I need the financial backing of HealthSync Solutions. I am the face of this family, not her.
I let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through her hysterical ranting.
You want to be the face of HealthSync, Brittany? I asked, projecting my voice clearly. You think you deserve half of my empire because you managed to barely scrape through your clinical rotations by crying to our father every time an attending physician gave you a bad evaluation. You do not represent the medical world. You represent nepotism. You are a walking malpractice suit waiting to happen.
And the only reason you have a job at Chicago General is because Dad bullied the residency director into accepting you. My father's face drained of color as the chief of surgery and several other department heads exchanged highly alarmed glances. The open secret of Brittany's incompetence was finally being dragged into the harsh light.
"Shut up!" Brittany shrieked, stomping her foot on the stage. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of my brains and my beauty. I am the doctor. I heal people. You just type on a keyboard. You owe me half of that company, Gemma. I will sue you for every penny you have. I will tell the press that you stole from your own family."
Her screaming echoed off the ballroom walls, ugly and desperate. The elite guests, who had previously respected the Kensington name, now watched with unfiltered revulsion. This was the golden child. This was the pride of the family. A screaming, greedy, delusional woman throwing a tantrum over money she had absolutely zero right to claim. Suddenly, a heavy hand clamped down on Brittany's wrist. The grip was so firm and abrupt that she dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a loud thud. Brittany spun around, ready to scream at whoever had dared to touch her, but the words died in her throat. It was Liam. The groom had been standing frozen near the steps of the stage, watching his new bride unravel into a monstrous, greedy caricature of the woman he thought he knew. The shock and terror he had felt upon realizing my identity had slowly morphed into something much darker as he listened to Brittany's unhinged demands. Liam's knuckles were white as he held her arm. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle ticked furiously in his cheek. Liam let go of me. Brittany snapped, trying to wrench her arm away. "Tell her, Liam. Tell her she has to give us the shares. You are the chief financial officer. Tell her the legal implications of withholding family assets." Liam did not let go. Instead, he pulled her back roughly, forcing her away from the edge of the stage. The look he gave her was one of absolute chilling contempt. It was the look a person gives a venomous snake they just found in their bed. "Are you out of your mind?" Liam said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that carried through the stunned room. "You are demanding equity from the woman who controls the hospital's financial restructuring? You are screaming at the chair of the transition board that can remove executives for cause, accelerate default remedies, and petition the court for receivership if your father obstructs the process." "But she owes us," Brittany whined, entirely missing the point. "She is my sister." "She owes you nothing," Liam fired back, his voice rising with barely contained disgust. "I just watched you and your parents try to humiliate a multi-billion-dollar CEO because you thought she was poor, and the second you find out she is wealthy, you demand half her life's work as a wedding gift. You are not a medical prodigy, Brittany. You are a parasite." Brittany gasped, stumbling back as if Liam had physically struck her. Liam's eyes swept over her lace gown, her flushed face, and the shattered bouquet on the floor, settling on her with profound revulsion. The reality of his situation had fully crashed down upon him. He was minutes away from marrying into a family of delusional, toxic frauds, and doing so would place him directly in the crosshairs of the most powerful woman in healthcare technology. The golden child had finally shown her true colors, and the man who was supposed to be her partner in building a medical dynasty was now staring at her with nothing but pure, unadulterated hatred. The heavy, suffocating silence that followed Liam's brutal rejection of his bride was abruptly shattered by the scraping of chairs from the front VIP table. While my parents remained paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their public humiliation, their most loyal enablers decided it was time to step in. My Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas stood up and walked toward the stage. Beatrice was the head of obstetrics, and Thomas was a prominent neurosurgeon. Together, they had spent the last 10 years acting as the ultimate echo chamber for my parents, reinforcing the toxic delusion that the Kensington medical dynasty was superior to everyone else. When I was kicked out of the house, they were the ones who told the rest of the extended family that I was a lost cause who deserved to be cut off completely. Now Beatrice raised her hands in a placating gesture, pasting a sickly sweet, condescending smile onto her face. She looked at me, not like a billionaire CEO who held their entire professional futures in her hands, but like a petulant child who was throwing a tantrum over a broken toy at a dinner party. "Gemma, dear, let us all just take a deep breath and calm down," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "There is absolutely no need to make things so ugly in front of all these distinguished guests. People are going to laugh at us if we continue airing out our dirty laundry like this. We are a respectable family." Thomas adjusted his tailored suit and nodded vigorously, stepping up beside his wife. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the calm voice of reason. "Your aunt is right, Gemma. You have made your point. You are very successful now, and we are all thrilled for you. But at the end of the day, family is family. Blood is thicker than water. Since you are clearly so incredibly wealthy now, just forgive the hospital debt for your parents. Write it off as a professional courtesy so we can all move past this. I stared at them, genuinely amazed by the sheer, unadulterated audacity radiating from their faces. They were standing in front of hundreds of people, completely ignoring the horrific abuse my parents had just inflicted on me minutes prior, and demanding a massive financial bailout disguised as a family favor. Beatrice stepped a little closer, lowering her voice as if we were sharing a private, intimate secret. Exactly, she cooed. $40 million is just pocket change to a global conglomerate like yours. It will not hurt your bottom line at all. And you are the older sister, Gemma. It is your fundamental duty to take care of Brittany. Just set her up with a nice, comfortable position on your board of directors, cancel the hospital debt, and let us enjoy this beautiful wedding. We can all be one big happy family again. The sheer entitlement rolling off their tongues made my blood run cold. They did not care that Brittany had just screamed at me. They did not care that my parents had publicly called me a gold digger and a defect. All they saw was a massive pile of money, and they believed their shared DNA gave them an automatic VIP access pass to my bank accounts. I looked down at Beatrice and Thomas. I did not scream. I did not lose my temper. Instead, I let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. Cancel the debt, I asked, softly, making sure to project my voice so every single doctor board member and wealthy investor in the ballroom could hear my response. You want me to write off $40 million as a professional courtesy to a family that threw me onto the concrete with absolutely nothing? Beatrice shifted uncomfortably, her fake smile faltering for a fraction of a second. We all make mistakes, dear. It is time to be the bigger person. I locked eyes with her, letting all the warmth drain from my expression. Where was this fierce loyalty to blood when my father froze my checking accounts? Where was this profound sense of family duty when I was eating expired food and begging for entry-level coding jobs just to keep the lights on in a freezing apartment? I called you Aunt Beatrice. I called you begging for a small loan to buy groceries because my parents had cut me off. Do you remember what you said to me? Beatrice turned stark white. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I will tell you exactly what you said, I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You called me a defective embarrassment and told me to lose your number. Neither of you cared if I starved because my parents labeled me worthless, but now blood is suddenly sacred because you discovered I control the restructuring covenants protecting the hospital where you work. Thomas swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. That was in the past, Gemma. We have to look to the future. You have the power to save your parents' legacy tonight. You can save all our jobs. Their legacy is a complete sham, I replied, my voice turning to ice. You stand there and demand that I absorb a massive financial loss just to protect their fragile, narcissistic egos. You want me to coddle a 30-year-old woman who just threw a temper tantrum demanding half of a tech empire she cannot even spell? You genuinely believe that because I have money, I owe you my forgiveness and my hard-earned assets? I took a slow, deliberate step toward the edge of the stage. The tension in the ballroom was so thick it felt suffocating. My parents were trembling near the head table. Brittany was openly weeping, clinging to a chair, because Liam refused to go near her. I am not going to forgive the debt, I said, my words ringing out with absolute, undeniable finality. On the contrary, I came here today to collect it. With my last word hanging in the air, Beatrice and Thomas stumbled backward as if I had physically struck them. They scuttled back to their VIP table, their faces drained of all color.
finally understanding that their shared DNA offered absolutely zero protection against my wrath. They had wanted to play the family card to secure a massive financial bailout, but they had severely underestimated the depth of my memory and the precision of my vengeance. I turned back to the authorized presentation portal. With one swipe, the redacted closing certificate disappeared. In its place appeared a board-approved forensic summary, displayed beside selected transfer records that counsel had cleared for disclosure. Patient information account numbers and unrelated employee data remained masked. Only the transactions tied directly to Gregory's administrative authority were visible. Earlier this evening, my sister screened that I stole her tuition money to fund my tech company. I announced, making sure my voice carried effortlessly to the front rows, where the hospital board of directors sat, in stunned silence. My mother claimed they funded my entire life, right up until the day I left their house. Both of those statements are absolute fabricated lies. 10 years ago, I walked out of your house with $0 to my name. My personal bank accounts were frozen. My credit was destroyed by my own father. I slept on the floor of a public library and ate expired food just to survive while I was writing the foundational code for HealthSync solutions. I paused, letting the harsh reality of my past sink into the minds of the wealthy guests who had spent the last decade believing my parents' polished lies. I did not take a single cent from the Kensington family. I continued my gaze, locking onto my father. But looking at this financial audit, I noticed something incredibly fascinating about how you managed to maintain your lavish lifestyle, Dad. A chief of surgery makes a very comfortable living, but your salary certainly does not cover the exorbitant spending this family has engaged in over the last 5 years. The math simply does not add up. I zoomed in on the screen using my phone. Bright red highlighted circles appeared on the massive display, making the damning numbers impossible for anyone in the ballroom to ignore. I pointed directly at the glaring discrepancies. When HealthSync entered the court-approved restructuring, the hospital board authorized an independent forensic review as part of due diligence, I explained. A licensed outside accounting firm received read-only access, preserved the server images, and documented every step in a formal chain of custody. My software flagged the anomalies. Human auditors verified them before counsel approved this summary. The hospital board members leaned in instantly. The chairman of the board, an older man named Dr. Harrison, stood up from his chair, his eyes darting frantically across the financial documents displayed on the screen. According to this internal audit, I declared, my voice echoing like thunder. Gregory Kensington used his top-level administrative clearance to set up a ghost vendor account. You did not just overspend, Dad. You actively embezzled over $3 million from Chicago General Hospital. The collective gasp from the elite crowd sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. A hospital administrator in the second row covered her mouth in sheer horror. But I was not finished. I was going to drop the heaviest, most unforgivable weight right on his chest. And the absolute worst part is the specific account you chose to steal from, I said, letting a cold, furious edge bleed into my tone. You did not steal from the general operating budget. You siphoned those funds directly out of the pediatric oncology research grants. You stole money meant for dying children. The ballroom erupted. The shockwave of my words hit the crowd of medical professionals like an explosive blast. These were elite doctors who spent their lives trying to save patients. These were wealthy donors sitting at the tables who had written massive personal checks to fund that exact pediatric cancer research. To hear that the chief of surgery had stolen their money was an unforgivable, sickening treason. And what did you buy with that stolen money? I asked, my voice rising above the chaotic murmurs of the outraged crowd. I swiped my screen one more time. Photos of bank transfers linked directly to Brittany's name appeared in high definition. You used those grants to buy Brittany her brand new Mercedes-Benz. You used stolen money to pay the lease on her luxury downtown penthouse. And most importantly, you used those stolen hospital funds to pay her outrageously expensive private medical school tuition, alongside massive under-the-table payments to the professors who were actively trying to fail her out of the program. Brittany let out a strangled, breathless noise. She looked completely hollowed out, staring up at the screen where her entire fraudulent medical career was being exposed to her colleagues, her attending physicians, and her fiancé. The narrative that she was a brilliant, hard-working medical prodigy was dead. She was nothing but a failed student, propped up by stolen charity money. Dr. Harrison slammed his fist down on the VIP table, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. Gregory bellowed, his voice shaking with absolute fury. Tell me this is a lie. Tell me right now that you did not touch the pediatric research funds. We have been telling the press for 3 years that we lacked the budget to expand the children's ward. Tell me you did not buy a luxury car with donor money. My father looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding freight train. His pristine, authoritative posture completely collapsed. He began sweating profusely, massive beads of perspiration rolling down his forehead and soaking into the collar of his expensive tuxedo shirt. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice came out as a pathetic, trembling squeak. Arthur, please, my father stammered, holding his hands up defensively as the wealthy donors began shouting at him. It is a misunderstanding. It is a glitch in her software. She is manipulating the data to frame me. I would never steal from the hospital. Do not blame my software, Dad. Independent examiners preserved the access logs, authorization records, vendor files, and bank confirmations under a documented chain of custody. The question transfers were approved through your administrative account and matched verification tokens issued to your registered device. Council has the original forensic images, and the audit committee already received the sealed evidence package. The wealthy benefactors who had funded the pediatric ward began shouting furiously. A prominent local politician threw his napkin on the ground in disgust. Several doctors were openly yelling at my father, demanding his immediate resignation. The room, which had been set up to celebrate the Kensington dynasty, had transformed into a tribunal of their absolute destruction. My father was hyperventilating. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an escape route, searching for an ally. But there was no one left. His colleagues looked at him with pure hatred. Liam stood near the stage, looking at his new father-in-law with extreme, unfiltered revulsion. The walls were closing in rapidly. The realization that he was not just going to lose his prestigious career, but was actively looking at decades in federal prison for massive embezzlement, finally crashed down upon his shoulders. He was visibly swaying on his feet, sweating bullets and gasping for air as the enraged crowd closed the distance around him. Gregory was suffocating under the crushing weight of his own exposure. But it was my mother who realized they had completely run out of runway. Barbara Kensington had spent her entire adult life navigating the treacherous social waters of Chicago's elite. She was a master manipulator, a woman who knew exactly how to twist any narrative to cast herself as the ultimate victim. She looked around the ballroom and saw the unmasked hatred in the eyes of the hospital board. She saw the wealthy benefactors reaching for their phones to call their attorneys and the police. She knew that in a matter of minutes, her husband would be in handcuffs, her daughter would be stripped of her medical license, and their family name would be permanently erased from high society. There was only one card left to play. She needed to immediately derail the tribunal, change the subject, and force the angry mob of doctors to remember their professional oaths. She needed a medical emergency. Barbara let out a sudden, high-pitched gasp that sounded like a dry branch snapping in half. She clutched her hands tightly over the bodice of her cream-colored designer gown, right over her heart. Her perfectly highlighted hair whipped around as her eyes widened in a display of exaggerated theatrical agony. She stumbled forward, her designer heels slipping intentionally on the polished marble floor. She knocked over a cocktail table, sending empty champagne flutes crashing to the ground in a cacophony of shattering glass. And then she collapsed heavily onto the floor. "Gregory," she whimpered, her voice a fragile, breathy squeak. "Gregory, my chest. It burns. I cannot breathe." The entire ballroom froze. The furious shouts from the hospital benefactors died in their throats. The blistering anger that had consumed the crowd just a second ago was instantly replaced by an atmosphere of chaotic panic. My father snapped out of his own panicked stupor the moment his wife hit the ground. For a man who had just been exposed as a ruthless embezzler, he recovered his acting skills remarkably fast. He dropped to his knees beside her, grabbing her shoulders and looking up at the crowd with wild, terrified eyes. "Barbara, stay with me," Gregory shouted, his voice cracking with manufactured desperation. "Somebody call an ambulance. My wife is going into cardiac arrest. We need a crash cart in here, right now." Brittany, seeing her mother writhing on the floor, seized the opportunity to redirect the intense, humiliating scrutiny away from her fraudulent medical career. She threw herself onto the marble floor, her expensive lace bridal gown dragging through the spilled wine and broken crystal. She grabbed Barbara's hand, sobbing hysterically. "Mom, please, hold on," Brittany wailed, burying her face into Barbara's shoulder. She looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of absolute venomous hatred as she locked eyes with me. "Look at what you have done, Gemma. Look at what your vicious lies are doing to her. You pushed her too far. She is having a massive myocardial infarction. If she dies tonight on this floor, you are a murderer. You hear me? You are a cold-blooded murderer." Her hysterical shrieking echoed off the ballroom walls, ringing loudly in the ears of every guest. For a brief second, the manipulation actually worked. The elite surgeons and medical professionals in the room were furious about the stolen pediatric funds, but their ingrained instincts began to take over. You do not ignore a dying woman on the floor, regardless of how despicable she might be. A murmur of genuine concern rippled through the crowd. "Stand back! Give her some air!" yelled Dr. Harrison, the chairman of the board, pushing his way through the crowd despite his previous outrage. "We have dozens of cardiologists in this room. Someone check her pulse. Do not move her neck." Several doctors broke away from the VIP tables and rushed toward the center of the room. Aunt Beatrice, who had scurried away just moments ago, came sprinting back, shouting for the hotel staff to bring an automated external defibrillator. The anger of the crowd was being successfully hijacked by the sheer panic of a life-or-death situation. Barbara lay on the floor, taking short, shallow breaths, her eyes fluttering closed as she played the role of the dying matriarch to absolute perfection. Brittany turned her furious gaze toward her fiancé, who was still standing a few feet away, completely frozen in disgust. "Liam, do something!" Brittany screamed, pointing at her mother. "Call the paramedics! Tell the hotel staff to clear the elevators! My mother is dying because of this psycho, and you are just standing there!" Liam did not move a single muscle to help her. He looked down at Barbara, writhing on the floor, then looked up at me. He was a financial executive, not a doctor. But he had spent enough time around the Kensington family to recognize a desperate, pathetic scam when he saw one. He took a slow, deliberate step backward, distancing himself entirely from the chaotic spectacle. I stood exactly where I was, my posture perfectly straight, relaxed at my sides. I watched the frantic scene unfolding at my feet with absolute, freezing calm. 10 years ago, this exact same theatrical performance had been used to control me. I remembered being 16 years old, begging my parents to let me attend a summer coding boot camp instead of a pre-medical biology seminar. My mother had thrown this exact same fit. She had clutched her chest, claimed my rebellion was causing her dangerous heart palpitations, and threatened to call an ambulance if I did not submit to her demands. She had weaponized her own health to keep me obedient and terrified. I knew exactly what an actual panic attack looked like. I knew what real pain looked like. I had lived it every single day when they threw me out into the freezing Chicago winter. Barbara was not having a heart attack. She was executing a calculated exit strategy. She made sure to land on a clean patch of marble to avoid ruining her dress. She made sure her hair fanned out dramatically instead of falling into her face. She was controlling her breathing perfectly to simulate distress without actually hyperventilating. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation designed to make the hospital board pity her and frame me as the ruthless, abusive daughter who had driven her mother to the brink of death. The doctors formed a tight circle around her. Dr. Harrison knelt down, his fingers pressing against the side of her neck to check her carotid artery. "She is tachycardic," he announced to the room, his voice tight with professional concern. "Her pulse is racing. We need to get her elevated and stabilized before the paramedics arrive." "You see," Brittany shrieked, pointing her finger at me triumphantly. "Her heart is failing! You caused this, Gemma. You came in here with your fabricated spreadsheets and your fake company, and you triggered a cardiac event. You are going to prison for attempted manslaughter." I did not flinch. I did not back down. The sheer audacity of her screaming threats only fueled the icy resolve running through my veins. They genuinely thought they could escape a multi-million-dollar embezzlement charge by playing dead? They thought their medical degrees made them untouchable actors. I slowly lowered my smartphone, slipping it back into my designer clutch. The massive LED screen behind me went black, plunging the front of the ballroom into a stark, dramatic shadow. The attention of the entire room shifted from the financial ruin on the screen to the quiet, deliberate sound of my high heels clicking against the marble floor. I walked forward. The crowd of elite doctors instinctively parted ways from me. They moved aside, creating a clear path right to the center of the chaos. The whispers died down entirely. The room held its collective breath, waiting to see if the billionaire CEO would show a single ounce of remorse for supposedly pushing her mother to the edge of death. I stopped right at the edge of the circle of doctors. I looked down at my father, who was holding my mother's hand and trying to look like a devastated, grieving husband. I looked at Brittany, whose face was stained with mascara and malicious triumph. And finally, I looked down at Barbara, who was peeking at me through her half-closed eyelids, waiting for my apology. A slow, chilling half-smile curved the corner of my lips. It was not a smile of comfort. It was the smile of an executioner who had just caught her prey walking right into the final trap. "Oh, Mom," I said softly, my voice carrying a mocking musical cadence that made the hairs on the back of the guests' necks stand up. "A massive heart attack. How incredibly tragic. How deeply convenient." Brittany scrambled to her feet, blocking my path to our mother. "Do not come any closer to her. Stay away from her, you monster." I ignored Brittany completely. My eyes remained locked on Barbara's fluttering eyelids. I took another step forward, my shadow falling over her trembling form. "If you are going to fake a myocardial infarction to escape a federal embezzlement charge," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the silent, horrified ballroom, "you really should have picked a room that wasn't completely filled with medical equipment." Right on cue, the heavy double doors at the side of the ballroom burst open. The hotel's on-duty emergency medical technician sprinted through the parted crowd, carrying a bright red trauma bag over his shoulder and a portable vital signs monitor in his hands. He looked frantic, clearly having been radioed about a high-profile guest suffering a sudden cardiac event. He rushed toward the circle of doctors, but I smoothly stepped directly into his path. My emerald gown flared around my ankles as I extended my hand, completely blocking his access to my mother. "Excuse me, ma'am. The hotel medic panted, trying to sidestep me. I need to triage the patient. They said she is in active cardiac arrest.
She is not in cardiac arrest, I replied. But chest pain still requires proper evaluation. Put the monitor on her, call the ambulance, and let the physicians here observe the readings while you follow protocol. The young medic blinked in confusion, clutching the equipment tightly to his chest. I cannot do that, ma'am. This is a medical emergency. I need to follow protocol. My father saw the exchange and immediately seized the opportunity to play the protective, devastated husband. He scrambled up from his knees, his face twisted in faux outrage. Gemma, get out of the way, Gregory roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. Have you completely lost your mind? Your mother is dying on this floor, and you are interfering with a medical professional? Security! Someone arrest this maniac! Brittany joined in, screaming from her spot on the floor. She is trying to kill her! Do not let her touch the equipment. I did not claim medical authority. I looked directly at Dr. Harrison and the hotel medic. My mother has publicly accused me of causing a cardiac emergency, I said. Please evaluate her exactly as you would any patient. Preserve the readings and do not let anyone turn this into another unverified accusation. The medic froze, completely overwhelmed by the chaotic billionaire drama unfolding in front of him. Before he could make a decision, a voice boomed from the front row. Give her the machine, son. The entire room turned to look. It was Dr. Harrison, the chairman of the hospital board. He stood tall, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes narrowed with intense, cynical suspicion as he glared down at my parents. He had spent the last 20 minutes watching my father be exposed as an embezzler, and his patience for the Kensington family's theatrics had completely evaporated. Let her test the patient, Dr. Harrison ordered the medic. We have 50 board-certified physicians in this room. If she is truly having a myocardial infarction, we will handle it. The medic nodded, knelt beside Barbara, and applied the pulse oximeter and automated blood pressure cuff himself. Dr. Harrison remained at his shoulder, supervising the assessment and making it clear that no one was diagnosing a heart attack from one set of numbers. Barbara was still putting on a spectacular, Oscar-worthy performance. Her eyes were squeezed tightly shut. Her breathing was intentionally shallow and ragged, and she let out soft, agonizing whimpers every few seconds. She was desperately clinging to the illusion, praying that the hospital board would pity her enough to stop the financial tribunal. I knelt down beside her, the luxurious silk of my gown pooling gracefully around me. I reached out and grabbed her left wrist. Barbara flinched violently, her eyes snapping open for a fraction of a second. She tried to yank her arm away, putting up a weak, trembling resistance to maintain the facade of a dying woman. Gemma, please, my mother gasped, out her voice a fragile, breathy whisper. Let me go. It hurts so much. I ignored her pathetic whimpering. With swift, clinical precision, I clamped the glowing red pulse oximeter onto her index finger. I then unrolled the automated blood pressure cuff, wrapping it tightly around her upper arm and securing the Velcro strap. My father hovered above us. You are not a doctor, he snapped. Correct, I said. That is why the medic is examining her and the cardiologists are supervising. With Dr. Harrison's approval, the audiovisual manager mirrored only the monitor display onto the ballroom screen, not my mother's face or private medical history. Barbara had demanded public intervention and accused me before the entire room. Now the physicians could watch the same limited readings while the ambulance remained on its way. The entire ballroom of medical elite turned their attention to the giant glowing screen. The soft, rhythmic beeping of the heart rate monitor echoed loudly through the silent room, amplified by the tension in the air. The blood pressure cuff hissed mechanically as it automatically inflated, squeezing my mother's arm, and then slowly deflated to register her systolic and diastolic readings.
Every single doctor, surgeon, and medical professional in the room watched the numbers calculate in real time. They all knew exactly what the vital signs of a patient in active cardiac failure looked like. They knew what oxygen deprivation and plummeting blood pressure looked like, and they knew how to read the massive, undeniable, digital numbers that popped up on the screen for the entire world to see. The machine chimed gently, locking in the final readings. I leaned down, placing my face inches from my mother's perfectly contoured cheek. She was keeping her eyes squeezed shut, but I could see the furious, panicked trembling of her jaw. I looked up at the giant screen, then back down at her. My voice was crisp, loud, and dripping with absolute freezing mockery as I read the numbers aloud to the audience. Heart rate 85. Blood pressure 120/80. Oxygen saturation 99%, I read. Those numbers alone do not rule out a heart attack, Mom. You still need an ECG and troponin testing. But they do not match the collapse you staged, and the ambulance will document every symptom. If this is real, go to the emergency department. If it is theater, keep performing for the paramedics and the police. The room stayed silent. No physician claimed that normal vital signs proved the absence of a cardiac event. Instead, every medical professional watched Barbara's face as the medic prepared adhesive ECG leads, and Dr. Harrison instructed staff to preserve the security footage of her fall. That was the moment her performance broke. Barbara's eyes snapped open. She sat upright, without dizziness, shoved the medic's hands away, and shouted that she was not going to any emergency department. The sudden, coordinated movement contradicted the helpless paralysis she had displayed seconds earlier. A contemptuous laugh came from the chief of cardiology, followed by another from a donor near the front. The laughter spread only after Barbara stood to, or off the cuff, and revealed that the emergency had been a diversion. Doctors shook their heads in disgust. Some guests covered their mouths while others raised phones to preserve the moment. They were not laughing at a patient with chest pain. They were reacting to a surgeon who had abandoned a medical evaluation the instant objective documentation threatened her story. The humiliation struck Barbara harder than any insult. Her face turned crimson as she realized the medical elite she worshipped had watched her refuse the very emergency care she had demanded. She ripped the pulse oximeter from her finger and scrambled to her feet, snarling that everyone should stop staring. The dying matriarch facade was gone. What remained was an enraged woman, exposed by her own decision to end the performance. She looked around the room, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with panic, as she watched her peers laughing at her. Her pristine, flawless reputation was completely pulverized. The prestigious career she had built on arrogance and superiority was crushed into dust right there on the marble floor. She was no longer a respected pediatric surgeon or an elegant society matriarch. She was a humiliated fraud who had just faked a medical emergency to cover up her husband's multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. Dr. Harrison looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are a disgrace to the medical profession, Barbara," he spat his voice, cutting through the laughter. "Pack up your things, both of you. You will be hearing from the hospital's legal department first thing Monday morning." Barbara opened her mouth, desperately trying to salvage whatever microscopic shred of dignity she had left, but no words came out. She was entirely broken, crushed under the weight of her own exposure. I stood up, slowly smoothing the front of my emerald gown, and looked down at my family. The golden child was weeping on the floor. The corrupt father was paralyzed with terror, and the narcissistic mother was completely stripped of her power, drowning in the mocking laughter of the very people she worshipped. The devastation was absolute, and my vengeance was flawlessly executed. But the domino effect of my family's total destruction was not quite finished. Liam had been standing near the edge of the stage, frozen in a state of absolute paralyzing dread. As the chief financial officer of Chicago General, Liam's entire career,
His reputation and his freedom relied on his ability to assess risk and mitigate liability. And standing before him, draped in a ruined lace gown and weeping hysterically on the marble floor, was the greatest liability he had ever encountered. Brittany was no longer the beautiful, highly educated daughter of a prestigious surgical dynasty. She was the direct beneficiary of a multi-million-dollar federal embezzlement scheme. She was the rotting anchor that would drag him down to the bottom of the ocean. Liam looked at his bride-to-be, then at my father, sweating under the hospital board's furious glare. Finally, his eyes moved to me. He saw the chair of the HealthSync-led transition board, empowered to order audits, recommend executive removal for cause, and refer evidence to regulators. If he concealed Gregory's crimes, his own career and freedom could disappear with theirs. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. In a matter of seconds, Liam made the most brutal, calculated financial decision of his entire life. Brittany, desperately seeking a lifeline amid the crushing humiliation of our mother's failed heart attack stunt, reached a trembling hand toward her groom. "Liam, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "You have to do something. Tell the board this is a misunderstanding. Use your financial authority. Tell them my father is innocent. We are your family now. You have to protect us." Liam looked down at her outstretched hand, as if it were coated in highly infectious disease. He took a sharp, deliberate step backward. His chest heaved as he sucked in a deep breath, steeling himself for the execution he was about to perform. "Do not ever use the word family with me again," Liam snarled. His voice was not quiet. He did not whisper it to spare her feelings. He projected his words with a booming, furious volume that cut through the lingering murmurs of the ballroom. He wanted every single hospital board member, every elite surgeon, and especially me to hear exactly where his loyalties lay. Brittany gasped, her hand recoiling as if she had been burned. "Liam, what are you saying? The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Liam reached up to the lapel of his custom-tailored tuxedo. His fingers clamped around the expensive white orchid boutonniere that perfectly matched Brittany's bridal bouquet. With a swift, violent jerk, he ripped the flower from the fabric, tearing the silk lapel in the process. He threw the crushed orchid onto the floor, letting it land directly in the puddle of spilled wine next to Brittany's knees. "We are not getting married," Brittany, Liam spat, his face twisting with absolute disgust. "We staged an expensive pre-ceremony reception funded by stolen pediatric charity money, and your criminal father paid for it, to display his fabricated wealth. I have not made vows, the officiant has not completed the certificate, and I will not proceed." The blood completely drained from Brittany's face. Her eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. "No, Liam, no! You cannot do this!" "I absolutely can, and I am doing it right now," Liam shouted, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "I will not stand before an officiant or sign any related agreement that binds my name, finances, or reputation to this family of pathological frauds." "You told me the Kensington family was medical royalty. You spent 2 years bragging about your elite pedigree. You looked down on my background because I had student loans, while you paraded around in a luxury car in downtown Penthouse." Liam took a step closer, towering over her trembling form. He pointed an accusatory finger right at her face, showing zero mercy. "It turns out you are nothing but a thief, Brittany. Your entire life is a mirage, built on embezzled hospital funds. You did not earn your medical degree. Your father bought it for you with money meant for dying children. You did not earn your luxury lifestyle. You leached it from the hospital's operating budget. You are the biggest fraud in this entire building." "Liam, stop it!" my mother cried out, attempting to intervene, despite her shattered credibility. "You are upset, but you love her. Do not throw your relationship away over a financial misunderstanding." A financial misunderstanding. Liam repeated, letting out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Barbara, your husband is looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny and fraud. You just faked a myocardial infarction in front of 50 board-certified physicians to avoid taking accountability. I am the chief financial officer of the hospital you stole from. If I stay associated with you for even one more second, I become an accessory to your crimes.
I will not go to prison for a family of sociopaths.
Brittany scrambled to her feet, her heavy lace gown weighing her down. She grabbed the lapels of Liam's ruined tuxedo, tears streaming down her face and destroying her bridal makeup. Please, Liam, do not leave before the ceremony. I love you. I had no idea where the money came from. I swear, I did not know my father was stealing. You cannot abandon me today. Everyone is watching. Liam looked down at her clinging hands with a mixture of pity and intense revulsion. He grabbed her wrists and forcefully pried her fingers off his jacket, shoving her hands away. You do not love me, Brittany, Liam said, his voice dropping to a cold, unforgiving register. You love my title. You love my salary. You love the social status of marrying a hospital executive because it validated your delusion of being superior, but the game is over. The money is gone. The prestige is gone, and I am gone. He turned away from her deliberately, turning his back on his bride, and looked directly at me. He squared his shoulders, attempting to salvage whatever professional credibility he had left in the eyes of his billionaire boss. Chairman Gemma, Liam said, his tone shifting into one of absolute, unwavering professional submission. I want to formally state for the record, in front of the hospital board and all present witnesses, that I had absolutely no knowledge of Gregory Kensington's embezzlement scheme. As CFO, I was denied access to the specific research grant accounts that your father controlled. I am fully prepared to cooperate with your internal auditors, the hospital board, and federal investigators to ensure every single stolen dollar is tracked down and recovered. I hereby sever all personal ties with this family effective immediately. I looked at Liam, evaluating his desperate pivot. He was a coward who had happily enjoyed the perks of the Kensington family wealth until the exact moment it became a liability. But he was a useful coward. He was choosing survival, and by doing so, he was driving the final nail into my sister's coffin. I appreciate your cooperation, Liam, I replied smoothly, projecting my voice so the board members could hear. Your willingness to assist my legal team will certainly be taken into consideration when HealthSync evaluates the restructuring of the hospital's executive administration next week. A wave of visible relief washed over Liam's sweating face. He nodded sharply, bowed his head to me once more, and then turned toward the exit. He did not look back. He did not say a single parting word to his bride. He simply marched down the center aisle of the ballroom, walking past the rows of stunned guests, and disappeared through the heavy mahogany doors, leaving his entire future with the Kensington family shattered on the floor behind him. Brittany let out an agonizing, guttural wail that tore through the silent ballroom. It was a sound of absolute soul-crushing despair. She collapsed onto her knees, burying her face in her hands as her body shook with violent, uncontrollable sobs. Her diamond tiara slipped from her messy hair, clattering against the marble tiles. The golden child, the perfect medical prodigy who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, was now completely destroyed. She had lost everything in the span of 30 minutes. She had lost the prestigious man she expected to marry. She had lost her credibility as a doctor. She had lost the financial backing of her corrupt father. And she had lost her dignity in front of the high society elite she worshipped. There was no easy return from this. She was a publicly disgraced fraud, abandoned before the ceremony by a man terrified to be associated with her name. I stood there, in my emerald gown, looking down at the weeping, pathetic shell of the sister who had told me to leave her wedding just moments prior. She had demanded that I be thrown out into the street because I was a defect. She had mocked my lack of a medical degree. She had bragged about her elite status. Now her status was obliterated. Her fiancé was gone. Her future was a black hole of legal investigations and public humiliation. And the college dropout she had relentlessly abused was standing over her holding the keys to the entire restructuring. My vengeance was not just complete, it was a masterpiece. The ballroom remained frozen in a state of suspended animation. The elite guests who had arrived, expecting a celebration of high society pedigree, were now trapped in the front row of a spectacular psychological collapse. Brittany remained on her hands and knees, her chest heaving with violent, guttural sobs that echoed miserably against the marble walls. She lifted her head, an absolute disaster of smeared mascara running foundation and pure desperation. Her eyes darted frantically toward the heavy mahogany doors, where Liam had just vanished. She looked at her parents, but Gregory was still paralyzed by the looming threat of federal prison, and Barbara was staring blankly at the floor, utterly broken by her own public humiliation. Brittany had no one left to save her. The realization hit her with the force of a wrecking ball. For her entire life, whenever she faced a consequence, she simply cried to our parents and they made the problem disappear. They bought her grades, they bought her car, they bought her residency slot. But they could not buy Liam back. They could not buy off a multi-billion-dollar tech CEO. And then the absolute unthinkable happened. Brittany, the golden child, who had spent her entire existence treating me like a contagious disease, began to crawl across the floor. Her ruined, expensive lace gown dragged through the spilled wine and broken crystal as she shuffled forward. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands and clamped her fingers tightly onto the hem of my emerald silk gown. "Gemma, please," Brittany wailed, tilting her head back to look up at me. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its usual arrogance and dripping with sheer, unadulterated panic. "Please! You have to stop him! You have to bring him back!" I looked down at her hands gripping my dress. I did not kick her away. I did not shout. I simply stared at her, allowing the hospital board of directors and all her wealthy friends to witness the exact moment the Kensington golden child abandoned every single ounce of her dignity. "He is your employee!" Brittany cried out, her fingers digging desperately into the silk fabric. "You are his boss! He has to do whatever you say. Your company controls the restructuring board reviewing his position. Call him right now, force him to come back and go through with the ceremony, threaten his job. And he will obey. Just order him to marry me." The sheer absurdity of her demand was staggering. She was begging me to use my corporate authority to blackmail a man into a fraudulent marriage just to save her social reputation. "I cannot lose him, Gemma," she babbled frantically, tears pouring down her cheeks and dripping onto my shoes. "I cannot lose face in front of my friends. They are all sitting right there. The other surgical residents are watching me. If Liam walks out on me today, I will be a laughingstock. My entire social circle will exile me. I will be ruined. Please, I will do anything you want." I remained perfectly still, letting her pathetic bargaining ring out through the silent ballroom. "I will be nice to you," Brittany pleaded, her voice cracking as she tried to negotiate with the woman she had viciously bullied for a decade. "I promise. I will invite you to our house for holidays. I will tell all my friends that you are a genius. I will even call you my sister if you want. I will call you my big sister in front of everyone. Just pick up your phone and order Liam to come back inside." I looked at her tear-stained face, processing the absolute absurdity of her offer. She genuinely believed that offering to call me her sister was the ultimate prize. She thought that extending the bare minimum of basic human decency was a grand sweeping gesture worthy of a multi-billion-dollar corporate blackmail scheme. 10 years ago, calling me her sister might have meant something. When I was a terrified 23-year-old girl, packing my meager belongings into a cheap suitcase while our parents screamed at me, I had looked at Brittany for help. I had begged her to say something, to intervene, to remind our parents that I was blood. Instead, she had leaned against the doorframe, smirking as she watched me cry. She had told me not to let the door hit me on the way out. She had stolen my laptop charger so I could not work on my coding projects, laughing as she tossed it into the trash compactor. She had never been a sister to me. She had been my primary tormentor, enabled and applauded by our toxic parents. And now she was kneeling in spilled wine, offering me a meaningless title to save herself from the consequences of her own fraudulent existence. I looked down at her hands, which were still clutching the fabric of my dress in a death grip. I did not yank the silk away. I reached down with slow, deliberate precision. I placed my hands over her trembling, manicured fingers. For a fraction of a second, a spark of desperate hope flared in Brittany's eyes. She thought I was going to help her up. She thought the old Gemma, the obedient, terrified scapegoat who always gave in to keep the peace, was finally resurfacing. Instead, I firmly pried her fingers off my gown one by one. I gently pulled my dress away from her grasp, letting the emerald silk fall smoothly back into place. I stood tall, looking down at her with an expression of absolute, chilling indifference. "I do not have a sister," I said softly. My voice was quiet, but it carried effortlessly across the room, slicing right through the lingering tension. "I am just a defect, remember?" Brittany froze. The air left her lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. The words I threw back at her were the exact same words she and my mother had used to humiliate me when I first walked into the ballroom. "You made your position perfectly clear 10 years ago, Brittany," I continued, my tone completely flat and unforgiving. "You made it clear again an hour ago when you screamed at me to get out of your elite presence. You wanted to represent the medical elite? You wanted to be the crown jewel of the Kensington dynasty? Well, congratulations. You are exactly what this family represents, a beautiful, hollow fraud built on stolen money and pathological lies." "Please," Brittany whimpered, her hands falling uselessly to her sides. "You cannot leave me like this." "I am not leaving you," I replied smoothly. "I am simply letting you live the exact life you earned." Liam made his own choice. As an executive of the hospital, I have zero interest in blackmailing an innocent man into marrying a parasite. Your social standing, your reputation, your friendships, none of that is my concern. You wanted to fly high on stolen wings, Brittany? Now you get to experience the fall. I turned away from her, breaking eye contact permanently. I had no desire to watch her weep anymore. The spectacle had run its course, and her groveling only highlighted the pathetic reality of her existence. The hospital board members, the elite surgeons, and the wealthy investors watched in stunned silence as the golden child of the Kensington family was left kneeling on the floor, utterly defeated and discarded. There was no pity in the room. There was only the cold, harsh reality of justice finally being served. I did not look back at her. I did not look at my father, who was still paralyzed by his impending legal ruin. I did not look at my mother, who was sitting silently among the broken glass of her shattered reputation. I simply adjusted my clutch and prepared to deliver the final crushing blow that would eradicate the Kensington name from Chicago high society forever. My father finally snapped out of his catatonic state. The sight of his golden child weeping on the marble floor, combined with the realization that his prestigious medical empire was actively collapsing around him, triggered a desperate, feral survival instinct. If he could not save his career or his freedom, he was going to try to save his pride. He was a narcissist, pushed to the absolute brink, and his only remaining defense mechanism was pure, unfiltered arrogance. He stepped over Brittany's ruined veil and marched toward me. His face was a mask of unhinged fury, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were stark white. "You think you have won," Gregory spat, his voice trembling with boiling rage. "You think you can waltz into this hotel with your forged digital documents and destroy my family? I have the best defense attorneys in the state of Illinois on retainer. I will sue you for every single penny you claim to have. I will drag you through civil court for defamation, slander, and corporate espionage. I will ensure you spend the rest of your pathetic life locked in a federal jail cell." I did not blink. I stood perfectly still, letting him vent his useless, empty threats. The hospital board members watched him with a mixture of pity and intense disdain. He sounded exactly like a cornered animal barking at a predator it could not possibly defeat. "And as for tonight, you are done?" my father continued, his voice rising to a frantic shout as he tried to reclaim his authority. "Get out of this venue immediately, and do not ever think about stepping foot anywhere near our estate in Lake Forest. You are permanently banned from my property. If you ever come within a mile of my home, my sanctuary, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Now get out of my sight." The corners of my mouth curled upward into a slow, freezing smile. It was the perfect opening. He had practically handed me the microphone for the grand finale. "Your property," I repeated softly. The words glided off my tongue, rich with absolute, delicious irony. I reached into my designer clutch for the final time tonight. I did not pull out my smartphone. I did not need the massive LED screen for this particular execution. Instead, I pulled out a single thick envelope made of premium linen paper. I held it up by the corner, ensuring the stark black lettering of a prominent real estate legal firm was entirely visible to him. "It is genuinely fascinating that you brought up the Lake Forest estate, Dad," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the hushed murmurs of the elite crowd. "Because it highlights just how completely oblivious you are to your own financial ruin. You embezzled $3 million from dying children to pay for Brittany's medical school bribes and Barbara's designer wardrobe. But $3 million does not even begin to cover the massive, gaping hole of debt you accumulated trying to maintain a billionaire lifestyle on a doctor's salary." Gregory's furious bravado faltered. His eyes locked onto the heavy envelope in my hand. His breathing grew shallow as a new, unfamiliar wave of dread washed over his features. "You missed your first mortgage payment 2 years ago," I stated, pacing slowly across the floor. "By last year, you were taking out second and third mortgages just to keep the lights on and the landscaping pristine. You were drowning in liabilities, Gregory. You were borrowing from loan sharks and leveraging equity you did not even possess. And 3 months ago, the bank finally had enough. They foreclosed on your precious, sprawling mansion. They seized the property because you were completely, irrevocably bankrupt." Barbara, who had managed to pull herself up from the floor, let out a harsh, barking laugh. It sounded like shattering glass. "You are lying again," she sneered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "We still live there. We woke up there this morning. We hosted a pre-wedding brunch on the terrace yesterday. The bank gave us an extension." "The bank completed a judicial foreclosure months ago, Barbara," I corrected. "After the redemption period expired and the court confirmed the sale, a HealthSync real estate subsidiary purchased the property and recorded the deed. You were allowed to remain only under a temporary written occupancy license while the company decided how to use the estate." I pulled a crisp, notarized document out of the linen envelope. I held it right in front of my father's sweating, ashen face. "Did you ever bother to check the parent company of that brokerage firm, Dad?" I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Did you ever look at the corporate hierarchy of the entity that currently holds the deed to the Kensington estate?" Gregory reached out with a trembling hand and took the document. His eyes frantically scanned the legal jargon darting across the paragraphs of real estate acquisition details until they landed on the final page. I watched his pupils dilate in absolute, unadulterated horror. The color drained from his face so entirely, he looked like a corpse. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab the edge of a nearby cocktail table just to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor next to Brittany. "The buyer is a wholly owned HealthSync subsidiary," I declared. "The recorded deed is in that entity's name, and I control it. I did not seize your house by waiving a debt document. My company bought the property through a completed court-confirmed sale and then permitted you to remain temporarily." The wealthy investors and high society guests gasped in unison. The ultimate humiliation had just been delivered. In the elitist circles of Chicago, financial ruin was the ultimate sin. Being exposed as a tenant living on the charity of the daughter you disowned was a social death sentence from which there was absolutely no recovery. "You cannot order me off the Lake Forest estate, Gregory, because title no longer belongs to you. The deed changed hands after the foreclosure court confirmed the sale. For 3 months you have occupied my company's property under a written license that expressly prohibits fraud, threats, and damage." Barbara let out a breathless, horrifying squeak. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with sheer panic as she looked at her husband for reassurance, but Gregory had none to give. He was staring at the deed in his hands, completely paralyzed by the reality of his total annihilation. "And now that this little family reunion is concluding," I said, reaching out and smoothly plucking the legal document right out of his trembling hands, "your grace period is officially over." I turned my attention to the entire family. Gregory, Barbara, and Brittany were all staring at me with hollow, haunted expressions. They looked like ghosts. "My legal team has already served written termination of that occupancy license and filed the possession case required by Illinois law," announced. "No one will change locks, disconnect utilities, or drag you out without a judge's order. The settlement packet in front of you offers one final chance to surrender, voluntarily document the condition of every room, return all keys and access codes, and avoid additional fees, property damage claims, and a public sheriff's enforcement after judgment." The realization hit them like a speeding freight train. The crushing, inescapable truth settled over their shoulders, driving them straight into the ground. They had no money. They had no careers, they had no reputation, and now they had no home. Every single exit was blocked. The high society elite they had spent their lives trying to impress were currently pulling out their phones to sever all ties. The hospital board was drafting their termination papers. The groom had already fled the building. They were trapped in a dark, suffocating cage of their own making, surrounded by the wreckage of their arrogance. And I held the only key. I reached into the inner pocket of my clutch one final time. My movements were deliberately slow, allowing the sheer terror to fully paralyze the 3 people cowering before me. I withdrew a thick, folded piece of legal parchment bearing the bold red seal of the Cook County Sheriff's Office. Gregory stared at the document as if it were a loaded weapon. His hands were trembling so violently that he could not even raise them to take it. So I simply let the paper drop. It fluttered through the tense air and landed perfectly on the table right in front of him, sitting stark and white against the spilled champagne. "I allowed you to remain rent-free for 3 months, under a temporary occupancy agreement," I said. "A small, irrational part of me wanted to see whether you could treat me with basic decency once I returned. The agreement preserved every statutory notice and court remedy required you to maintain the property, and barred threats, fraud, and unauthorized transfers. It never gave you ownership, permanent tenancy, or permission to use the estate as collateral for the Kensington image." I looked down at Barbara, whose face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with hysterical, soundless sobs. Then I looked at Brittany, who was staring blankly at the wall, completely catatonic, as her entire reality disintegrated. "But you proved my theory within 5 seconds of me walking through those doors," I continued, my tone dropping to a freezing, absolute finality.
You pointed at me and called me a defect. You demanded security throw me out like garbage. You stood on this stage and claimed that your abusive, manipulative parenting was the key to my success. You have not changed. You have only grown more arrogant, more entitled, and vastly more corrupt.
My father tried to speak. He opened his mouth, his lips pale and quivering. But no sound emerged. His vocal cords were completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his ruin.
The voluntary surrender deadline is 48 hours, I announced. Sign the agreement, photograph the premises with the property manager, remove your belongings, and return the keys peacefully. Refuse, and the pending possession case will continue through the required hearing until a judge enters an order that the sheriff, not my employees, will enforce. Every additional day will be documented for use and occupancy charges and damage. Either way, your control of that estate is over. Barbara let out a pathetic, strangled wail. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, her expensive designer gown soaking up the spilled wine on the marble floor. "Gemma, please," she begged, her voice scraping against her throat. "You cannot do this. We will have nowhere to go. My friends, my social circle, they will all know. Where will we live? You cannot put your own mother on the street." I stepped back, pulling my hemline out of her reach. "You put your own daughter on the street 10 years ago, Mom, and you did it with a smile on your face. You told me to starve. So consider this an opportunity to practice that tough love you are so incredibly proud of." And regarding the $3 million diverted from pediatric oncology grants, my counsel has delivered the independent forensic report to the hospital audit committee and appropriate authorities. Investigators will decide the charges, and a court, not me, will decide guilt and punishment. I will not bury the evidence to protect your reputation. The silence that descended upon the ballroom was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was not the stunned, breathless quiet of an audience waiting for a punchline. It was a thick, suffocating, deathly silence. The kind of silence that follows a fatal car crash. The kind of silence that signals the absolute permanent end of an era. The hospital board members, the elite surgeons, and the wealthy investors had heard enough. The Kensington family was not just a social embarrassment anymore. They were a massive, toxic legal liability. Dr. Harrison, the chairman of the hospital board, was the first to move. He did not say a single word to my father. He did not offer a nod of sympathy or a look of regret. He simply buttoned his suit jacket, turned on his heel, and walked briskly down the center aisle toward the heavy mahogany exit doors. His departure broke the invisible dam holding the rest of the guests in place. Suddenly, the entire ballroom sprang into motion, but no one moved toward my family. It was a mass synchronized exodus. The elite society that Barbara and Gregory had spent their entire lives worshiping was actively fleeing from them, like they were highly infectious. Chairs scraped loudly against the marble floor. Expensive crystal glasses were set down hastily on the tables, leaving half-finished champagne behind. High heels clicked urgently toward the coat check. The wealthy benefactors who had funded the pediatric ward muttered in furious hushed tones as they ushered their spouses out of the room. Attending physicians and surgical residents bypassed Brittany completely, refusing to even look at the weeping bride sitting in the wreckage of her own reception. "Gregory, wait!" Barbara cried out, reaching a trembling hand toward a passing socialite she had played tennis with for years. "Diane, please wait. Let us explain." The socialite did not even break her stride. She pulled her expensive fur wrap tighter around her shoulders and practically sprinted for the exit, actively averting her eyes to avoid making eye contact with my mother. It was the ultimate crushing punishment for a family composed of narcissists. They were not being yelled at anymore. They were not being fought with. They were simply being erased. The high society crowd they had sacrificed their own daughter to impress was treating them like they no longer existed.
Within 5 minutes, the massive, opulent ballroom was virtually empty. The string quartet had quietly packed up their instruments and slipped out the back service doors. The catering staff had vanished into the kitchens, unwilling to serve a family that was about to be investigated by the federal government. The only sound left in the cavernous room was the pathetic, echoing sobs of my mother and sister, and the heavy, irregular breathing of my father. They were completely alone, isolated in the center of a dying, ruined empire, surrounded by thousands of white orchids and overturned chairs. I stood there for a moment, taking in the absolute devastation. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel guilt. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. The heavy, suffocating chain that they had wrapped around my neck a decade ago was finally completely shattered. I was no longer the ugly high school grad. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the architect of my own salvation and the engineer of their demise. I adjusted the strap of my designer clutch, turned my back on the weeping remnants of the Kensington dynasty, and began to walk toward the exit. I did not look back. I did not need to. There was absolutely nothing left for me in that room but ghosts. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut with a soft, final thud. The click of the latch echoed through the cavernous ballroom, sealing the Kensington family inside their own personal tomb. I paused a few feet away from the exit, turning slightly to take one last look at the empire I had just leveled to the ground. The physical destruction of the room perfectly mirrored their psychological collapse. The lavish $500,000 wedding reception was a complete wasteland. Custom floral arrangements of imported white orchids had been trampled under the expensive leather shoes of fleeing hospital board members. The petals lay crushed and bruised against the cold marble floor. Overturned chivalry chairs created a chaotic obstacle course of discarded luxury. At the center of it all, the towering 5-tier artisan wedding cake stood completely untouched. The table supporting it had been bumped during the mass exodus, causing the cake to lean precariously to one side. The delicate sugar flowers were beginning to crack and crumble, sliding down the pristine white fondant like a slow-motion avalanche of ruined dreams. The absolute abandonment by the high society elite was the sharpest blade of all. These were the people Barbara and Gregory had worshipped. These were the country club socialites, the chief medical officers, and the wealthy political donors for whom my parents had sacrificed their own daughter. Yet not a single one of them had stayed behind to offer a comforting shoulder. There were no sympathetic hugs. There were no hushed promises of legal help or social support. The moment my family transformed from medical royalty into federal liabilities, their supposed friends had discarded them with the same ruthless, chilling efficiency that my parents had once used on me. Barbara remained slumped on the floor, surrounded by the jagged shards of broken crystal and the dark, sticky stains of spilled red wine. Her designer gown, the armor she used to intimidate anyone she deemed beneath her, was permanently ruined. She hugged her knees to her chest, rocking slightly back and forth in the wreckage. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and completely detached from reality. She was unable to process the absolute eradication of her social standing. "This is impossible," Barbara muttered. Her voice was raspy, stripped entirely of its usual commanding, arrogant tone. It was a pathetic, broken whisper of a woman losing her grip on sanity. "This is impossible. We are prestigious doctors. We save lives. We are the Kensington family. People respect us. We are elite. We are prestigious. We cannot lose everything." She repeated the words over and over like a broken record, desperately trying to cast a verbal spell that would rewrite the nightmare unfolding around her. It was the ultimate collapse of a family that had only ever lived for appearances. Their entire existence was built on looking down on others, on measuring their worth by how much fear and envy they could inspire in their peers. They treated kindness as a weakness and wealth as a weapon. Without their money, their clinical titles, and their stolen prestige, they were absolutely nothing. They were just empty, corrupt shells sitting in the dark. Gregory had not moved an inch. He stood paralyzed next to the head table, staring blankly at the eviction notice still resting on the stained tablecloth. He was a man who had built a 40-year career playing God in the operating room. He was used to dictating the lives of his surgical residents and his family with an iron fist. Now his authority was completely obliterated. He was not a respected chief of surgery anymore. He was just an exposed, terrified criminal, waiting for the federal authorities to place him in handcuffs. His shoulders were slumped, his posture defeated, crushed under the undeniable weight of the evidence I had just presented to his entire professional network. Brittany was curled up near the edge of the stage, hyperventilating into the heavy, suffocating layers of her stained bridal veil. Her weeping was the only prominent sound left in the massive hollow room. The wealthy groom who was supposed to secure her future was gone. Her fraudulent medical career was gone. The luxury penthouse funded by stolen charity money was gone. She was forced to face the reality that she had never earned a single accomplishment in her entire life. Every victory she ever celebrated had been purchased with stolen funds. A lesser person might have walked back to the center of the room. A lesser person might have screamed in their faces, cursed them for the decade of starvation and trauma, or gloated over their agonizing, very public downfall. It would have been incredibly easy to stand over them and demand the apologies I had been denied 10 years ago. But I felt absolutely no desire to kick them while they were bleeding out on the marble. Gloating would imply that I needed their validation. Screaming would imply that they still held emotional power over my heart. They wanted a reaction. They wanted to know they still mattered to me, even if it was just through my anger. But they held zero power. I was not angry anymore. I was not seeking an apology from people who were fundamentally incapable of genuine remorse. I was simply the consequence of their own horrific actions. They had planted the seeds of their destruction the night they chose greed and pride over their own child, and I had just handed them the bitter harvest. I did not say another word. I did not offer a parting glance of pity or a final triumphant smirk. I simply smoothed the fabric of my dress, perfectly content with the silence. I smoothly turned on my heel, the emerald silk of my gown sweeping elegantly across the floor. I pushed open the heavy exit doors and walked out, leaving them trapped forever in the dark, suffocating ruins of their own greed. I stepped out of the grand ballroom and into the brightly lit corridors of the Chicago Plaza Hotel. The heavy velvet-lined doors swung shut behind me with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing the Kensington family inside their self-made tomb. As I walked down the plush carpeted hallway, the suffocating tension that had gripped my chest for the past hour completely evaporated. The hotel lobby was bustling with ordinary evening traffic, businessmen checking in at the front desk, couples laughing over cocktails at the lobby bar, and tourists admiring the crystal chandeliers. None of them had the slightest clue that a multi-million-dollar medical dynasty had just been utterly dismantled less than 100 feet away. I navigated through the crowded lobby, my emerald gown catching the light. I did not rush. I took my time, savoring the feeling of absolute, unadulterated freedom. For 10 years, the shadow of my parents' conditional love and ruthless expectations had stalked my every move. They had convinced me that without their prestigious medical connections, without their financial backing, I was destined to be a miserable failure. But as the automated glass doors of the hotel slid open and the crisp, cool night air of Chicago brushed against my face, I knew that shadow was gone forever. I had not just survived their rejection, I had thrived in it. The vibrant energy of the city wrapped around me. Car horns blared in the distance, Neon signs reflected off wet pavement, and the towering skyscrapers glowed brilliantly against the dark sky. The cool wind whipped a few loose strands of hair across my face, but I did not mind. It felt incredibly refreshing. It felt like breathing pure oxygen after being submerged underwater for a decade. I looked down the circular driveway of the hotel entrance. A sleek, black town car was idling quietly at the curb. Leaning casually against the passenger side door was Caleb. Seeing him standing there, under the warm glow of the hotel marquee, my heart executed a familiar, comforting flutter. Caleb was not a doctor. He did not come from old money, and he could not care less about high society pedigree or medical board politics. He was a brilliant software architect who had partnered with me in the freezing, cramped studio apartment where HealthSync Solutions was born. We had spent countless sleepless nights debugging code together, eating cheap takeout on the floor, and building an empire from absolute scratch. He had seen me at my absolute lowest. He had held my hand when the panic attacks over my parents' cruelty threatened to consume me. He had celebrated my smallest victories long before the billions rolled into our corporate accounts. Caleb did not love me because I was a Kensington. He loved me despite it. He was my business partner, my most trusted confidant, and as of 3 months ago, my incredibly supportive fiancé. Caleb pushed himself off the car door as I approached. He was wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, his tie loosened casually at the collar. The moment his eyes locked onto mine, his face lit up with a genuine, breathtaking smile. It was a smile completely devoid of the toxic, calculating manipulation that had defined every interaction with my blood relatives. It was just pure, unfiltered warmth. He reached into the back seat of the car and pulled out my heavy cashmere coat. As I stepped off the curb, he moved forward and gently draped the coat over my bare shoulders, his hands lingering affectionately for a brief moment to ward off the chill of the Chicago night. "Finished taking out the trash?" Caleb asked. His voice was smooth, carrying a perfect mixture of dry humor and deep, unwavering support. I looked up at him, letting out a genuine, joyful laugh. It was the first real laugh I had experienced all evening. It felt incredibly light. The contrast between the venomous, shrieking chaos I had just left behind in that ballroom and the calm, steady presence of the man standing in front of me was staggering. My parents and my sister had spent their entire lives treating relationships like business transactions. They measured love by how much utility they could extract from a person. They believed that shared DNA gave them the right to inflict endless psychological abuse, and they demanded absolute loyalty in return. They were a family in name only, bound together by nothing but mutual greed and an obsessive, desperate need for public validation. But looking at Caleb, I realized I had already won the ultimate prize long before I bought the hospital debt or seized the Lake Forest estate. I had built my own family. I had surrounded myself with people who valued honesty, who showed up during the darkest times, and who celebrated my success without demanding a piece of it. I had forged a family chosen by love, built on a foundation of mutual respect and unbreakable trust. "The trash has been permanently disposed of," I replied, wrapping the warm cashmere tightly around myself. "There is absolutely nothing left to clean up." Caleb smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good, because the board of directors needs you bright and early for tomorrow's meeting, Madam Chairman. We have a massive hospital administration restructuring to approve, and I hear the new executive team is eager to meet their boss." "I will be there," I promised, stepping closer to press a soft kiss against his cheek. Caleb opened the heavy car door for me. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, settling into the plush interior. He rounded the back of the car, slipping into the seat next to me, and gave a brief nod to our driver. The town car pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the flow of downtown traffic. I leaned my head against Caleb's shoulder, feeling his arm wrap securely around me. I looked out the tinted window as the majestic, glittering facade of the Chicago Plaza Hotel shrank into the distance. Inside that building, a dynasty of frauds was weeping over their shattered empire. They were currently suffocating under the weight of federal investigations, foreclosure notices, and absolute social ruin. They had dug their own graves, and they would spend the rest of their miserable lives lying in them. But I was not looking back anymore. I had closed that door forever. The sleek black car sped forward, accelerating into the brilliant, illuminated skyline of the city. We were leaving the dark, toxic past permanently in the rearview mirror, driving straight toward a future that belonged entirely to me. 6 months passed, with the rapid, unstoppable momentum of a bullet train. The fallout from that single evening at the Chicago Plaza Hotel dominated the local news cycles for weeks. The headlines splashed across the front pages of the Chicago Tribune and flooded the evening television broadcasts were absolute poetic justice. Gregory and Barbara were indicted after prosecutors reviewed the independent forensic audit bank confirmation server images and witness interviews. Months later, both entered negotiated guilty pleas to financial offenses tied to the diverted pediatric research funds. The court ordered updated restitution reports before sentencing, while the hospital pursued a separate civil action to recover the missing money, investigative costs, and interest. Their attorneys could argue about punishment, but they could no longer deny the authenticated transfers bearing Gregory's approval chain. Illinois regulators imposed emergency suspensions that prevented them from practicing while formal disciplinary cases moved forward. After evidentiary hearings, the medical board revoked Gregory's license for financial dishonesty and abuse of administrative authority, and revoked Barbara's for professional misconduct, false statements, and assisting the cover-up. The decisions were separate from the criminal court and based on their own record. Their country club attorneys filed appeals, but no polished reputation could erase sworn testimony, forensic records, and their admissions under oath. Without Gregory's influence shielding her, Brittany's residency collapsed. Chicago General opened a documented competency and ethics review, compared her evaluations with the improper payments, and terminated her training appointment for dishonesty and failure to meet program standards. The state licensing process remained separate, but her application stalled under the misconduct investigation and the public record created at the wedding. Other prestigious programs rejected her immediately, unwilling to inherit the legal exposure and patient safety questions attached to her name. The last I heard, the former golden child of the Kensington dynasty was working part-time as a receptionist at a rundown strip mall urgent care clinic on the absolute outskirts of the city. She spends her days answering ringing phones, dealing with angry walk-in patients, and filing endless stacks of paperwork, desperately trying to pay off the legal fees and luxury car loans she can no longer afford. She lost her wealthy groom, her fake career, and her stolen high society status all in one single night. While their world burned to the ground, mine was just taking off. It was a brilliantly sunny Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. I stood on a raised platform overlooking a massive crowd of journalists, city officials, and community leaders. Behind me stood a brand-new, state-of-the-art medical facility with pristine glass windows and bright, welcoming architecture. This was the HealthSync Pediatric Care Center. Instead of simply hoarding the wealth generated by my tech conglomerate Caleb and I had completely funded this new clinic. It was designed specifically to provide world-class, entirely free medical treatment to underprivileged children and families facing pediatric cancer. We took the very sector my parents had selfishly stolen from and transformed it into a fortress of healing accessibility and hope. Caleb stood beside me, looking incredibly handsome in his tailored suit. He squeezed my hand proudly as the mayor of Chicago handed me a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. I looked out at the cheering crowd, smiling genuinely as I cut the bright red ribbon. The crowd erupted into deafening applause, the sound washing over me like a warm, validating breeze. I stepped up to the wooden podium, adjusting the microphone. The flashing cameras of the press no longer felt like a threat. They felt like a victory lap. I looked directly into the news cameras, knowing that somewhere in a federal holding facility, my parents might be watching this exact broadcast from a small mounted television in a common room. "Thank you all for being here today," I said, my voice projecting with unwavering clarity and absolute peace. This center represents the firm belief that true power is not measured by what you can take from others, but by what you can build for them. For a long time, I was taught that love was conditional, and that my worth was defined by the unrealistic, toxic expectations of people who only cared about appearances. But I stand here today as living proof that your past does not dictate your future. I paused, letting the silence command the attention of every single person listening. Sometimes, being disowned is the greatest privilege a family can grant you. I declared, my words ringing with fierce, undeniable truth. Because when they push you off a cliff, they have absolutely no idea that you can build an entire empire from the rocks at the bottom. The applause that followed was thunderous, but my message extends far beyond the crowd that gathered in Chicago that morning. To everyone watching this video right now, if you are suffocating under the weight of a toxic family, listen to me. If you are constantly told that you are a disappointment simply because you refuse to fit into their narcissistic mold, hear me clearly. You are not a defect. You are not a failure. Walking away from people who actively disrespect your boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate, necessary act of self-preservation. Do not let them convince you that you cannot survive without their conditional support. Take the pain. Take the unfair rejection and use it as high-octane fuel to forge your own path. Build your own chosen family. Build your own success. Surround yourself with people who celebrate your victories instead of plotting to steal them. The sweetest, most undeniable justice you will ever achieve is simply living a brilliant, happy, and fulfilling life that your abusers no longer have access to. You do not need to scream, and you do not need to seek physical revenge. The truth always reveals itself, and natural consequences will handle the rest. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember to stand tall, know your absolute worth, and never be afraid to burn down a toxic bridge if it lights the way to your true destiny. Keep building your empire, one rock at a time. After the ceremony, Caleb and I walked through the new pediatric wing, while children painted bright handprints across a dedication wall. One small girl stopped me beside a computer station and asked whether I had built all of this by myself. I looked through the glass at the nurses, engineers, donors, and community volunteers working together and told her the truth. I had started alone, but I had not finished alone. The people beside me had become the family I chose. Before leaving, I placed the old apartment key I had carried for 10 years inside a small display case near the entrance. Beneath it, a plaque read, "The first door closed, the rest were built." Then I took Caleb's hand and stepped back into the sunlight, no longer carrying the Kensington name as a wound. For the first time, my future was not a reaction to what they had done. It was a choice I was making, freely, surrounded by people who valued my work, my boundaries, and the woman I had become. At last, for good.